friends. Thank you for being here. I was just, I'm amazed this time around watching what's going on in the Middle East, how many different perspectives I'm reading around the world. Everybody has a lens through which to see things. It may be ideological, it may be political, it may be religious, economic, whatever. But we tend to analyze through that lens everything that's going on in our world, and then we assume that we're logical and rational, and anybody who disagrees with us is full of fallacious logic, irrationality, or evil or something. And we all seem to have a monopoly on the truth. Anyway, I follow this guy, Jared Brock. He's a Christian. I don't know what denomination or if he has a denomination. He's got a very interesting take on the New Testament and the Jesus thing, which is, I don't know, it kind of strikes me as being a little socialistic and so on. It's very idealistic. It's very protopian, if I can say that. But I like him. He talks about all kinds of things, not just his faith. He talks about banking and stuff like that. I find him interesting. I find him genuine. I find him sincere. So, there you go. So now he just put a piece up called Jews versus Muslims, a Christian perspective. So there's the lens. I wouldn't say Jews versus Muslims because there's a lot of Muslims in the world. They're not all the same. There are a lot of Jews in the world. They're not all the same. My lens is through power. I'm not like real politic or something like that, but I see players who want power and control over resources, and a whole bunch of us who just want to live, get along in life and survive and have families and have friends and loved ones and housing and education, simple. And I think most Israelis are like that, and most Palestinians are like that. I think most Lebanese are like that, Jordanians and Egyptians and people from Oklahoma and San Francisco and Seattle and Arkansas. Just throw a dart at the map. Obviously, there are huge differences between, Quakers and Calvinists and Catholics and Orthodox Christians and Hasidic Jews and, secular Jews. Just pick a thing. Democrats. What kind of democracy? You know what I'm saying. So anyway, he gets into his little conversation by saying there's a lot of dumb arguments out there. We all tend to believe that any argument that's not our argument, that's not coming from our perspective or through our lens, is a dumb argument. So I think that's dumb to say, personally. Then he talks about the differences between the people. So 99.53% identical genes they share. You pick your average Jewish person or Israeli in the region and contrast that with your Levantian, Palestinian in the region. And of course, Homo sapiens share 99.6% of our DNA. So, it's interesting. Homo sapiens share 99.6, and then there's this slight little difference between Israelis in that region and Palestinians. There's a 5.53 as opposed to 0.6. So I don't know what that says, Again, you want to get into bell curve arguments and things like that, or you want to discuss the differences between you and me and boys and girls. And obviously, that discussion is informed by all kinds of things as well, whether you're looking at DNA or looking at anatomy or whatever. Choose your criteria to compare and contrast. So he says he's a Jesus follower, so he doesn't have any dogs in the fight, and then he starts to fight. As a Christian, I laugh at the silly idea of human ownership, like omniscience, perfection, omnipotence, ownership is not a human category. So he's attributing those categories to God, and we're just not like that. We're not all that. We're not omniscient and omnipresent and perfect. So temporary matter cannot own permanent matter. That's interesting. So we're here, we're going to live and die based on our fate, God's plan or whatever. And how can we say we own anything on this earth? Yeah, it's an interesting point, but we do. Because as we go through this article, everything's predicated on human stories, human interpretation and development of law and jurisprudence and whatever. And the law is even in the Bible or in the Quran or whatever you want to choose. It's like, this is the law and God told us it's the law, but it's still a human construct, creation, thing. You may not believe that, but whatever. Some people know what God's thinking all the time. I don't know if that's like omniscience or omnipresence or perfection. I mean, being able to read the mind of God, for God's sake, that's an incredible gift if that's what you've got. So your interpretation as you pray on it, meditate on it, of the scripture informs you, like, why is God punishing me? Why am I having bad luck? What have I done? That can be a very useful process to go through, imagining, what have I done, and having God in the loop, So instead of just facing it alone with your therapist or your cognitive behavioral therapist or whatever, your mindful meditation, you can have God in the loop. And, okay, I see. That's what God wants me to do. Thank goodness. I know that now. Moving forward, things will be better. So he says, nations are legal fictions. God calls them dust. So there's a scripture in there. Borders are imaginary lines in the sand. They are. I mean, they're arbitrary to a point until you have a war and people put up fences and so on. And then they're a little bit more to us than just abstract lines in the sand. So, and he's logical. He's not dumb. None of his arguments are dumb. And I love Jared Brock. Anyway, as a thinking person, I abhor false dichotomies. Yeah, okay. When given two dumb options, i.e. the wholesale eradication of Israelis versus the wholesale eradication of Palestinians, choose neither. Yeah, I agree with that. It's absurd what's going on. You and I don't have a choice to choose a side in genocide. Heck, even God doesn't choose sides. The Bible says he is no respecter of persons. Whatever. So there you go. Everything's in the Bible. There's an answer to everything. So we shouldn't choose sides. God doesn't choose sides. And yet, there you have it. People killing each other. Now, in A Problem from Hell, they talk a lot about the Balkans, Bosnian Serbs, Rwanda. And it's very complex for America to be the peacekeeper, or America and its allies to police the earth and say, we're going to keep the peace. And there are lines we're not going to allow you to cross. It's not as easy as just believing that. You actually have to mobilize troops and equipment and political agreement and so on across nations to do anything. So it's not as easy as just saying, well, the Hutu are killing all the Tutsi. Sometimes there are, people are less likely to defend certain kinds of people. So if we live in a Trumpian, white, ethno-Christian state, maybe they don't want to defend Muslims. Some people don't. Not all people, obviously. So what's the point of this article? The point is to point out illogical fallacies, creative lies and downright absurdities surrounding the horrible war. So, of course, nothing he says is at all illogical fallacies. That's interesting. Illogical fallacy. So he says, free Palestine. What does that mean? And he boils that down to it's a slogan like hope or change or make America great. This one is purposefully manipulative and vague. Well, yeah, you're going to use these memes, aren't you? Sound bites and whatnot. Even normal people are going to do that because they can't write a whole treatise or an academic paper on a sign and walk around with it. What does it mean? I don't know either what it means. Free Palestine from what? And keep in mind that the whole state of Israel was created by imperial and colonialist interests and out of guilt for the Holocaust, and some people trying to find a place to put the Jews, and some Zionist Jews trying to find a place to call home. And it's very complex and convoluted. And yes, it's a real thing. And maybe, God's not involved because he doesn't get involved with these kinds of things. So what's the point? They want a ceasefire in Gaza for, peace, free Palestine. In other words, when I asked what the slogan meant, they just repeat the slogan, useless. So he pressed again. I want freedom for Palestine, human rights, and the right to have an ordinary life where children can dream. Well, sure, who wouldn't want that, he says. I kept pressing, but eventually we got to the unsurprising truth. They want the Israelis dead or gone from the Middle East. Again, this is not helpful because it fuels hate and this kind of us versus them thing, where you can easily categorize one group as evil and wrong and the other group is right, and then you can go follow that logic to genocide or horrific war and whatever. I don't think everybody feels that way in the Middle East. Maybe a lot of people do around the world, but not everybody. It's just unhelpful language, I think. You have to put some humanity and nuance in there, otherwise you risk creating more enmity and more anger and more hate. Anyone with a fully developed brain, he says, sorry boomers, sorry Gen Z, can see how free Palestine is just really weak propaganda. Because in reality, free Palestine is code for dead or homeless Jews. Israel equals promised land? Well, we can say that, and we'll see how that helps if we want to frame it that way. There's no end in sight, people. So what was Yahweh's deal with Abram ben Terah? The covenant was absolutely clear. Obey my commandments, and I will bless you to be a blessing to all the families of the earth. Disobey me, and I will withhold my blessing. And I wish people would just get down with being peaceful, and if there's some beautiful code of ethics that God meant, and it works to create peace and good stewardship and better health for everybody on the planet and better health for all the ecosystems on the planet and the end of the sixth extinction and an opportunity to have a future for our grandchildren, then I'm all down with that. But how are you going to codify that in what denomination and convince the whole world that they should follow? What kind of miracle would that be without coercion and war and ethnic cleansing and stuff like that, which we all hate, we don't like, we all fear and think is grotesque and stunted and ugly. Clearly, Israel is not being a blessing to all the families to the earth. Clearly, Israel is ignoring the covenant command to limit retribution to an eye for an eye. Hamas murdered 1,400 Jews, and Israel is now killing more than 3 times that amount. Enough is enough. Why don't we just stop? He has a great point moving down. As a Christian, I would add that Israel has also ignored the Messiah's command to turn the other cheek. So now we're getting into the New Testament, and why did those Jewish people ignore Jesus, or the super apostle Paul, or the Byzantium or whatever? Yeah, go figure. No accounting for taste in religion or whatever. The reality is that the land and temple no longer matter anyway. Followers of God are his temple, and his kingdom is here. So if you interpret things properly from the Bible, you're the temple, and it's all here anyway. You don't have to fight over land. And we got to remember that these ideas and stories, emerged long ago. And there's been iterations of them since the first kingdom, thousands, 8,000 years before Christian era or whatever. I don't know. How do we get everybody on the same exact page? Maybe writing some articles will help. I don't know. But Western nations support Palestine. He says that's ridiculous. That's not true. These are misleading slogans. Sweden stands with Palestine. No, Muslims in Sweden stand with Palestine. This bothers me. I think Jared knows better than this. There's no atheist or agnostic or secularist or Christian or whatever in Sweden that feels some sympathy for the Palestinians and what's happening to them, and therefore uses a slogan like stands with. This is a simplification. It's not helpful. And again, it creates this idea that the Muslim infiltrators, that disease in Sweden, is going to cause problems in the future. A lot of right-wingers believe that. And there's this great replacement theory that we're all familiar with, that they're going to come up there and breed miscegenation with our people and wreck their genes and heritage and culture and whatever, as if Sweden hasn't Americanized to some degree or compromised on its traditional values, whether you go back to whenever Sweden became a Christian place, if that's what you think it is, or before when it was a pagan place, Vikings. And he goes on to talk about how these things changes. Yeah, obviously. But I don't like the way he's framing it. Britain stands with Palestine. No, British Islamists stand with Palestine. So now we're saying that anybody who walks in the street because they have sympathy for what's happening in Gaza is an Islamist and stand with Palestine. This is just wrong. Roger Waters is an Islamist? Please give me a break. This isn't helpful. Is this fallacious illogical fallaciousness, logical fallacies? Come on. Remember, the fundamental principle of Islam is that the caliphate must expand, but the global nation of Islam knows it can't beat America and its nuclear-armed allies, so its modern game plan seems to be take over a country. Before I go into the game plan, so Christians don't do that. They don't go and wipe out indigenous groups in the Americans and try to convert them all to Christianity. Members of the Mormon community don't go out around the world and proselytize, try to get people to adopt Mormonism. Church of the Latter-day Saints, or we don't have Catholic missionaries, and so on and so forth. And sure, some of them, it's a gentle approach, They would rather get slaughtered by right-wing death squads than commit a sin, and that's beautiful. And in extremist Islamic and groups, they do feel justified to just slaughter everybody who's against them. And there is a long history of that. So yeah, you can take Sam Harris's points and say, okay, now what? I've been in, Malaysia and Indonesia and many places in the world where it was mostly Muslims there. I never felt afraid. But of course, I didn't go to the war. The war was all around us that summer. I didn't go to it because I'm not crazy. But, and I'm not a journalist, a heroic journalist going in there to try to report on these things, like Chris Hedges was at one point. But anyway, so his plan is take over a country or area, make it so miserable for the masses that millions emigrate to less harsh countries. Are people in Malaysia and Indonesia trying to make it really miserable for their people? It's like if they just got on board with a Christian Canadian who emigrated to the UK, if they just got on board with his thing, it would all be great all of a sudden. So the agenda of Muslim people and leaders in Indonesia is to make all Indonesians move to Sweden or Denmark or the UK or America because it's so damn miserable. If people were left in peace to get on with their lives, do you think they would want to leave Jordan or Syria when they become a failed state like Yemen or Libya? They don't just want to leave because their people, their brothers and sisters in their country, wanted to make them miserable. There was all these things going on with the power players in the world, and in all, in particular the United States, at the moment anyway, because it's the most powerful place in the world. And they have their agendas to control their interests, their national interests, according to who? The guy on the street in Denver? Or who? The corporation? I don't know. It is corporatist to a certain degree, obviously. But anyway, so they decide they're going to do this, that, and the other thing. They let the slaughter continue in Bosnia until it just got so bad they finally decided to bomb Serbs' NATO jets, right? But it takes thousands and thousands of people to get slaughtered, real genocide, before they do anything. But anyway, that's another story. But I don't think everybody wants, I think people want to stay home in their country with their people and their culture and be left alone. So if that's multipolarity, I'm all in. Maybe we don't want McDonald's here or Disneyland. It's like maybe we like Iraq, even though it's not perfect and our leader's kind of a son of a bitch and so on and so forth. It's not about that, people. It's about somebody in the halls of power saying, we have to control the stuff over there. It's in our interest. So we need friendly people in Colombia and Venezuela and Iraq and Afghanistan, anywhere else in the world. And if they're not friendly to our interests, which is corporate interests, let's be honest, because it really has nothing to do with the guy in Minnesota, ice fishing. Then they've got to go in and do regime change or do whatever to make sure that people toe the line. You code the capital, you make the laws, you make the rules-based order, you decide. It's not about stopping genocide. It never is. So you have to read that book, A Problem from Hell. Anyway, Islam takes root in those nations. It's brilliant, really. They are now 5.7 million Muslims in France. 4.1 million living in the UK. What's the point? You want to stoke religious warfare? Prejudice? Fear? So I guess the idea is, they're infiltrating, great replacement. We better block them out, send them home, which, they would go home if we didn't keep bombing their countries and wrecking their economies because we don't like their leader, because we don't like the way they do things. We don't like the way they worship God, praying and facing some direction and eating certain things. Like,
they're not good for business.
Okay, you don't eat pork, whatever. Why do you care in Alberta, when you're trying to fill the truck up with gas? Well, you care because you want the gas to be a certain price, but you don't necessarily know how that happens. Anyway, 1 million living in Sweden. Why, Jared, are the people really moving? Because the West is the best? Because they want to be Christians like you in your style of Christianity? Or because they're fleeing something horrible that their mommy and daddy and the mayor of their town didn't want to happen in the first place? So there are complex webs of causes again. And you can't just point your finger at one thing. So given these figures, it's easy to pretend like he says France stands with Palestine, even though that's not even remotely true. I don't think France stands with Palestine. France? French people? Some do, in a certain way. Ask them why. And be fair. Don't do this straw man bullshit. But it makes you wonder, if Islam is so great, then why are so many people trying to leave Muslim nations? Because they're failed states. They would like to stay home. My Muslim Malaysian people are not like in droves moving to Sweden. And my Indonesian Muslim friends and Bali Hindu friends, whatever, are not moving in droves. Although they are, in certain areas, westernizing in the sense that you have to have strip bars and whorehouses and all that kind of stuff for the tourists, the Western tourists. Are Thai people immoral because of some neighborhoods where they have certain kinds of entertainment? The entertainment popped up to entertain the troops on leave from Vietnam. I mean, that's one of the reasons, not the sole reason. I'm not saying every Thai person is the epitome of moral and ethical virtue. But come on, this is ridiculous. So these are questions that demand answers. Anyway, Israeli Palestinians were here first. Then he goes and talks about, the thing we all know, that, Westerners, displaced First Nations and tribes. They did it in Australia and all around the world, whatever. Celtic tribes before UK. Gauls were in France before the Franks arrived. Etruscans were in Italy before the Italians arrived. Slavs were in Russia before the Russians arrived. Sumerians were in Iraq before the Iraqis arrived. Right. I mean, call yourself what you will at any given moment in history. It changes. Throw a dart at the map. Get really specific. Look at the context. Look at the information, the data, the history, whatever other lines of evidence there are, and make your determination about the phase shift and why it happened. Was it Mongol hordes? Was it Roman legions? What was it that shifted the power dynamic at the moment? This is not very helpful framing it in this way. That's why I'm upset about it, or I don't like it. So now he's saying we'll get really spicy. So he's incredibly clever here. The Canaanites were in Israel before the Israelis arrived. Right, and you have to define Israeli. Were the Egyptians, when they were exiled in Egypt, were they Israelis? How did people refer to them back then or whenever? Again, throw a dart at the timeline. The Egyptians were in Gaza before the Gazans arrived. Well, gosh, why? What powers were behind all of that as that happened? You know, this is not helpful. I mean, it's obvious, but, if you really want to talk about that, talk about the history of it in an honest way. Indo-European speaking Aegean Philistines were in Palestine before the Palestinians arrived. Yeah, okay, so what? Folks, neither the Israelis nor the Palestinians were the first in the land. Wow, that's amazing. I didn't know that. So this isn't a Christ-honoring theocracy where every single human being has land rights and is allocated an equal portion in order to meet their needs. So this is his political lens, right? This is the way his interpretation of the New Testament is how it should be, and you're not doing that. So then he goes on to say, we live in a secularist post-modernity where might is right and dog-eat-dog, survival of the fittest, Darwinism. Was dog-eat-dog, might makes right? Did that exist 10,000 years ago, or 8,000, or 5, or 2? It's just postmodernism, or whatever? And it's Darwinistic? Well, we can take Darwinism and have a very uncharitable, very shallow view of it from the 19th century. And we can contrast that and compare that with the theory of evolution as it's understood in 2023. But there was dog-eat-dog, Hobbes, Thomas Hobbes, right? Or the Leviathan, and that was way before Darwin. So I don't know. Christians always have to throw Darwin into it. He's some satanic thing or whatever. Evolution is crazy. You always get that. And I love Jared Brock. I do. But when I see these tropes, it bothers me. I'd love to have a conversation with him, a personal conversation, not recorded, just the two of us, for him to enlighten me a bit. Seriously, friends, anyone who says, but X was here first is not a serious person. Yeah. So he's talking about, do you have to be DNA tested to live somewhere, and blah, blah, blah. And he says, both people groups, like all people, are genetic mutts. Yeah, so thank you for bringing genes into it. Isn't that convenient? But let's use Darwin as this bugaboo. The land they're fighting over was once home to Canaanites, Philistines, Israelites, Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, Byzantines, Arabs, Crusaders, Mongols, Mulaks, Ottomans, British, Egyptians, and Israelis. Yeah, that's right. So let's forget about the genetic thing, shall we? I mean, yeah, these borders and so on are very, very fluid. So then he has a bone to pick with Palestine is being occupied by Israel. Well, you live in a village in Oklahoma, you own your house, your property, your land. Somebody comes in, says, I have a good reason to take your land and your house and kick you out. You can go anywhere. You can go to Arkansas, you can go to Texas, anywhere you like, but you can't live here. And you say, but wait a minute, I have a legal right to this property. I was here first. Possession is 9/10 of the law. Roman or common law. Very long tradition of that, by the way. And you have a beg to differ, but they say, no. I'm taking it. So there's an argument to be made there. You don't have to create this whole convoluted thing where you're like, well, you actually weren't here first. There were Native American tribes here before you. Are you going to just say you're going to give back your land to the Native American tribes? My argument is I deserve it more than you because of this, that, the other thing. So this is a ridiculous argument. I don't even want to talk about it anymore. He talks about Syria, Iraq, and now he's talking about, let's have a quick look at the countries we know with historical certainty that Islam violently and brutally invaded, continue to occupy. You can characterize it that way because that's what everybody did back in the day. Nobody just walked in. The Puritans didn't just go to America and set up a place in Pennsylvania or wherever I forget where what part they set up in, and say, well, we're going to be really nice to the Native Americans if they just understand that we need their land and their property, and if they don't, we're just going to have to kill them. I mean, saying that Islam went to Syria, Iraq, Egypt, Iran, Libya, Azerbaijan, Tunisia, Afghanistan, Algeria, Morocco, India, Pakistan, Turkey, and Bangladesh, and violently made everybody turn into Islam's, it's just ridiculous. You could say the same thing about Christian coercion and conquest, Scythians, and just whatever. So you have to go to all these countries and say, all right, don't you know that, in the Middle Ages, these Arabs came and made you become Muslims, and you should be miserable, and you should just say, wait a minute. And then what were you before? Exactly. Do you even remember? Do you have any cultural memory of this place we now refer to as Libya before 642 AD? And what influenced the culture of Libya before 642 AD? Was it Romans? Was it Egyptians? What was it? Was it pure? Was it perfect? According to Jared, of course not, because it wasn't his brand of Christianity. For some reason, God works in mysterious ways, and his particular Christianity doesn't always come out on top. So there's a lesson there to be learned. God doesn't care about that stuff. It's up to us. Get on the right side of history. And the other side will beg to differ with you. They just will, I'm sorry to say. Please follow Bulliam T. We're all going to be happy. So anyway, ownership is a false gospel, he says. And okay, we can go back to indigenous communities and how they dealt with nature in their small, less than Dunbar number tribal groups and bands and so on, living in harmony with nature. Never over hunting, never over fishing. We don't live in a world like that. We live in a world of consumption. We take it all from nature, from the earth, from each other, and we make stuff. We build. We build on it, baby. Build on it. There's some free space over there. Build on it. And we leave some stuff to farm on, but we do it industrially because we have 8 billion people here. And we're pretty damn good at it because we have oil and gas and coal. And we have science, engineering, and technology. So we're pretty good at exploiting the earth. That's what we do. And then we come up with all kinds of legal codes and systems to make an argument for what we own, private property rights and so on and so forth. And we're pretty good at that. We have real estate agents that walk us through buying a house, and we have lawyers and all that. So he says, now he goes on this huge thing where he quotes tons and tons of Bible verses, so I'll just give you a sampling. Every acre of land is God's. Every fathom of the sea is God's. Every foot of the sky is God's. Every inch of the earth is God's. Every gift is God's. Every throne is God's. Every piece of clothing is God's. That's nice. So if we all just sat back and realized this is all God's stuff, we really don't own it, maybe we could all just try to figure out how to be good stewards and live in peace and harmony and manage our resources better. And we wouldn't need to have, 1 billion t-shirts and pairs of shoes. We wouldn't need to have the latest super truck and whatnot. But it's not going to happen until we crash, we will crash. and billions of people die. And maybe later some people think maybe there's a better way to live on Earth. Maybe, maybe not. Who knows? I'll never know. I don't think I'll live that long. So then he says something that makes kind of sense to me, which I wish would happen. If Hamas dissolved their anti-democratic government and let everyday Palestinians have a new free and fair democratic election. So Netanyahu's folks, his clique, supported the last elections and kind of backed Hamas in a way. There's a whole thing you can delve into there. Hamas wasn't domesticated. It didn't become this, normal kind of white bread political organization holding elections. Democracy is different things to different people in different times and places and contexts. Let's be honest. So remember, these two sides are not apples to apples. Only one side has a long history of suicide bombing, raping women, beheading people, kidnapping children en masse, and purposefully and knowingly murdering civilians. I don't like kamikazes. World War II creeps me out. Suicide bombing is grotesque. What ISIS was doing is disgusting. And they put a stain on everyone in the world that call themselves Muslim. In my opinion, I think it's grotesque. Framing it this way, only one side, in a very general sense, doesn't really help. It's not helpful. That's what I think. As if, there was some really high moral ground that certain kinds of Israeli Zionists occupy for whatever reasons. Most Palestinians are just normal people trying to live their lives. Yep, Hamas is, as one reporter put it this week, like ISIS on steroids. Again, I don't think that's helpful. It justifies the murder. We got to do everything we can to dig them out and kill them all, and then everything will be okay. If we can just kill all the Bosnian Muslims, the world will be a better place. Didn't work out for the Bosnian Serbs. So they got 44.45% of the vote. That happens, especially when you have several parties vying for a place. You're not going to get a 51% majority unless you have two, right? You're playing a football game. There can be only one winner and one loser. But it's in a lot of countries, there's many, many different parties, and they get a little piece of the vote. So the one that gets the power at the end of the day might have only gotten 26% of the vote, but they got more than all the other factions. If Hamas was generally serious about safety in Palestinians, which their refusal to let Gazans escape. So the idea here is that Hamas is holding a gun to everyone's head in Gaza and saying, you can't go to Jordan or Egypt. And I've already said, Egypt doesn't want all the Gazans in Sinai. It doesn't want it. And a lot of Palestinian people there don't want to leave. You can say they're crazy. I mean, I probably would have gone, and I'd gone to Sweden or one of these other places and been one of these bad refugees that wanted to dilute the blood of the native, pure Swedish people. Because it's a failed state. It doesn't exist. Another thing I want to say is I heard Yanis Varoufakis say he doesn't want to term it an open-air prison anymore. It's a concentration camp. I think that's a distinction I would make. So if you look at it like that, it's pretty horrific to think that Jewish people who call themselves Jews, are part of this. And not everyone, every Jew is down with this bombing. So I wouldn't generalize. I would talk to an individual and say, what do you think? Okay, explain it to me. And then if I disagreed, I'd say, I just can't see it that way. My heart won't let me do it. My mind won't let me do it. America and the rest of Israel's allies are already pressuring her to chill out. If Hamas gave up their Khan, Israel would have no choice but a ceasefire. I don't think calling Hamas's actions or what they're doing a Khan is helpful. Hate them if you will. Call them all Hamas people terrorists. But they're not con artists. They're fighting for what they consider to be good reasons. And you may disagree, but calling it a con is ridiculous. You could say that their strategy in a game theoretic sense is ridiculous and stupid. You know, going into Israel and onto kibbutzim and just killing all these people and taking hostages and all that. That's not the way to do it. You know, land the airplane on the tarmac, take everybody hostages, and try to get sympathy. It didn't work then. It doesn't work now. Taking innocent people, non-combatants, as hostages today, you know, in the 20th and 21st century, no, that's not something most people would get down with. So it's a stupid strategy, unless the strategy is in some dumb way. Israel's going to bomb Gaza into dust, and the whole wide world's going to realize that Israel's evil, and we need to put the Palestinians back in the West Bank and repatriate everybody to their old family homes. It's not going to happen. What happens usually in history is once you take it, it's yours. Then you establish new rules and you say, that's mine now. And not much you can do about it unless you have power. And then you kill a bunch of people to get it back. Eventually one side loses, and you have these tiny little areas where Native American people can live and call them their nation, where the rest of the United States is American. Texas is part of the United States. California, New Mexico. It's not part of Mexico. It's not part of Spain. Yeah, of course. So in conclusion, so friends, should the Jews get land? Should the Muslims get the land? Drum roll, please. Who gets the land isn't the point. The point is that we should hate dumb arguments. Well, I dislike them. They annoy me. I don't hate them. I don't have that much room in my life to hate. It's just not there. I might say it once in a while when I'm emotional, but I don't spend much time on it. Hate comes like, ooh, I hate that, and is gone. But I think some of Jared's arguments here are dumb, or maybe it's just the way he's framing it, right? And the language he's using. I don't think he's the most logical guy on the planet necessarily. I don't think any of us are. So nothing will change until dumb arguments change, okay? You said it. Nothing will change unless people stop pretending to be dumb. Yeah, I mean, head in the ground, the ignorati, I call them, people who just want to believe reality isn't reality. You know, theory of gravity is scientism. You know, people like that, yeah, I don't like it. Because we all know what's actually going on here. There is a will to murder in the Middle Eastern air. Until we address suicidal, homicidal elephant in the room, nothing changes. Just more lies, just more war. I think what he means by the elephant in the room is just all of us just not living according to his interpretation of the Bible and the New Testament, not being Jesus enough. And if I could characterize a Jesus like he characterizes a Jesus, then I myself wish there were more Jesuses walking around on the planet. But that doesn't mean that I think everybody should convert to Christianity or some particular type of it, and everything would be utopian, or the protopian thing would be to encourage you to become a certain type of Christian. But anyway, if you believe that strongly, nothing's gonna, well, in some ways I think it's a blessing, because you believe you know the absolute truth, absolutely, and you can get on with your life. Okay, that's it for now. Thanks for hanging in there with me. Bully MT, out.
Thank you, Madden. Yeah, like you said, I'm based in Berlin. I'm therefore speaking from Germany. And the past few weeks have been, I think, the most surreal of my life. German media and politicians may be silent about the genocide of the Palestinian people in Gaza, but I can assure you that doesn't mean they haven't been busy. They've been very busy, in fact, doing something else, using the Hamas attack on Israel as a pretext to unleash all of the racism and Islamophobia that they know they usually better off hiding. Almost immediately after October 7, pro-Palestine demonstrations were banned, like you mentioned in your intro. The guise for this blatant violation of freedom of expression is combating anti-Semitism. Well, part of the Jewish community tried to stage a protest called Jewish Berliners Against Violence in the Middle East. That protest was banned. A protest called simply Youth Against Racism was announced. That protest was banned. A lone Jewish Israeli protester held up a sign saying "Stop the genocide in Gaza" on a Berlin square. She was arrested. Neukölln, a neighborhood here in Berlin with a large population of Turkish and Arab descent, has been turned into a police state. A huge non-stop presence of police in riot gear have been harassing residents, assaulting protesters, pepper spraying journalists, including Jewish ones, and they've arrested children of Arab descent as young as 9 years old. Who is this for? Who does this make safer? Meanwhile, Olaf Scholz, the German chancellor, who is a social democrat on paper, has basically turned into Donald Trump as far as migration is concerned and called for mass deportations. The media keeps stoking up racist fear-mongering against Muslims with stories about Hamas fighters hidden among a future wave of refugees. Palestinian voices are being shut down simply for being Palestinian, as happened in the Frankfurt Book Fair, where Palestinian writer Adania Shibli had her award ceremony canceled. One journalist for one of Germany's largest newspapers figured that at this point she might as well just say the quiet part out loud. The other day she tweeted, "Islamophobia may be justified." And you might be thinking that she deleted the post and apologized right away. No, that was 3 days ago and it's still up. Check it for yourself if you don't believe me. Her name is Fatina Keilani. Anti-Semitism is a major issue in Europe and in Germany, and it's been on the rise. It has no place in any society, and it needs to be combated vigorously, and TM25 will always stand against it. And we will do well to remember that the fact that ideologically motivated episodes of anti-Semitism in Germany are far more common among the racist, xenophobic far right than among the Arab and Muslim communities. And that the party that represents this racist, xenophobic far right is currently polling in second place nationwide. And that far right views are known to be prevalent inside the police, which is exactly the group of people currently terrorizing the residents of Neukölln and in other places as well. A couple of days ago, 100 Jewish artists, writers, and scientists living in Germany wrote the following in a beautiful open letter. As Jews, we reject this pretext for racist violence and express our full solidarity with our Arab, Muslim, and especially Palestinian neighbors. We refuse to live in prejudiced fear. Let's listen to them, echo their words, and do the same.